Okay, so part two is how to. To do any of this, as I mentioned, an OpenAI account and an API key. So included this link. How's this going to go for screen sharing? Switch it while I'm sharing.
Open the other link.
Here we go. Okay, so this is OpenAI's website. They're introducing that they can now generate video as well as text and image, which is terrifying. So we're going to log in. Actually, I already have an account and it's already remembered that it's me. So if you create an account, then you can go either to ChatGPT or to their AI or their API. So there's going to be all of this like documentation on how to use their API. There's an overview, there's just an introduction, key concepts, what are text generation models, etc. And then once you're signed in and you've got an API key, which is pretty straightforward to get, you just go over here and you say, I need an API key. It'll generate one. Then I think one of the things that you're going to want to first play around with before you do much of anything else is just go to the playground. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in part 3. But the playground is kind of like ChatGPT, only you get a lot more functionality. So you get to say what the system prompt is. System prompt is in the background of everything else that comes after that. So this is where I would say you're a philosopher who specializes in ethics. Or what I often say actually is you are a research psychologist reading text from participants in a study. But you could say, you know, anything you want. And again, it might be interesting to try and see, like, if I say you are a Democrat or a Republican, you are a middle-aged, you know, Latina woman who from Arkansas, like who knows how meaningful it would be depending on how precise you get. But that's just in the background, you're kind of telling it how to think and to respond. Then you have a prompt that here you could just play around. The idea with this is you just can see immediately, just like you would in ChatGPT, what is it doing? How is it responding? So you put your prompt in here and then you would hit submit and it would give you something back. But what's cool about the playground as opposed to ChatGPT is you can do stuff like, which model do you want to use? Here's GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo. There's also these different versions of GPT 3.5. You can have it show you more. There are a whole bunch of, you know, various versions. Basically what those are is like previous versions of that model. So it's kind of constantly being updated, which actually is something people worry about a little bit, is if you like what you're getting from one version, they make an update, is it going to give you the same results? So that's something I think we probably do want to talk about later. But you'd pick your model. Then there's this temperature setting, which again is something you don't get in ChatGPT. Temperature setting is basically how deterministic is its response. If you set it to 0, then if you give it the same system prompt and the same chat prompt, it will give you the same completion, the same response every single time. Some people like that, and I've heard some people in this sort of burgeoning literature talking about you should set it to 0 so that it's reproducible. But part of what's cool and human-like about GPTs is the fact that it's not purely deterministic. The fact that there is a little bit of just, you know, creativity, for lack of a better word. I mean, some people think creativity is a certain amount of randomness under certain kinds of constraints. So I actually think you don't want to set it to 0. What exact setting you should use, again, this is more stuff like we should probably be experimenting with. My normal is 0.2. That's just the default in the tool that I'm using, and I think that's, you know, that gives me just a little bit of randomness, but it's also going to be very reproducible. It's going to be very similar across iterations. If you set it to 2, it probably would become unusable, or, you know, it would be a little too crazy. But under the hood, basically what that's doing is, think about what the model is trying to do. It's trying to predict the next word. So it's coming up with probability estimates for like the different words that could be next. If you set temperature to 0, it picks the number 1 most probable word. If you set a little bit wider margin on that, then it might pick from among the top 3 or 10 or however many words. And then that could lead you down different paths that otherwise you wouldn't have seen. Length is how long can the response be? You can basically just cut it off at a certain point if you don't want it to do too many, which might be nice if you're worried that it's going to hallucinate or something, and it would end up like you make an API call and it sends you back a novel and you now have to pay per token for the novel. You probably don't want that. You can also tell it to stop sequences. Like if it hits a certain thing, if it says a certain thing, cut it off right there. Then there's some other things about how it's selecting words. One of the things that might be kind of interesting to play around with too are these like frequency penalties, right? So it's trying to basically it's trying to come up with probability estimates for the next word. You can penalize like if this is a word we've already seen, or if there's so how much to penalize new tokens, meaning new sort of bits of words as to whether or not they already appear in the word or in the text of the response. So some of these details, like I actually don't even know very much about and haven't really played with. Again, these are some of the things like people with more expertise in like machine learning probably could tell you a lot more about. But the reason I show you the playground is because this is probably the place where you want to start. This is where you play around. This is where you figure out, this is the kind of prompt I want. I am liking the responses from GPT-4 a little better or whatever. You set maybe a temperature setting or whatever, and you kind of get ready to go from there. Then, then you automate it. And one thing, this came up earlier, but might be worth reiterating is, so this is a screenshot from their website, link at the bottom. This is their sort of statement about how they use the data, and where they basically say, if you're using our free stuff, well, there's a reason it's free. We're saving those data. We want to train our new model. We're trying to improve the models as we go. So we're going to use your data. However, above, if you're using the API, we will not do that unless you ask us to, unless you opt in. And the reason you might want to do that is because you're a business and you're hoping this model is going to get really, really good at something, and you're happy for somebody else to have the data so that the tool that they're providing to you gets better for the thing you want to do. But that's their official policy. So let's talk about automation. How do you automate this, right? This came up earlier. Like if you had to just go in the playground one at a time and say, here's the text, submit, you might as well just read it yourself, right? If you're just doing that manually, that's not really helping you. So you want to automate this. This is a tool that Igor Grossman and a collaborator, Jackson Liu, came up with. It's on the University of Waterloo website. It's called AI Coder. It's basically just a way to do API calls from a little graphical user interface right on the web, which is very cool. He and I talked a little bit about this when it came out. Thanks, Rick. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting kind of like, now this is just available. If you're a psychologist who maybe you've never even heard of an API before and you want to just do this, like here it is, you could use it. These are some screenshots from what it looks like. Basically, you enter your API key, you upload a CSV, you say which column has the text that you want to code. Then you say, what do you want to code for? I'll say I want to code for spirituality. Here's my definition of spirituality. Which model do you want to use? Do you want to do zero shot or few shot? Again, do you want to provide a couple of examples of correct codings? And then you would say, I want to indicate whether it's present or absent, low, or high. And then you just run it. Notice that constraint of you get dichotomous or trichotomous, and that's it. Igor and I think, maybe have a disagreement about whether or not it's useful to have a more, at least, more levels on an ordinal, if not continuous scale, if not interval scale of some kind. But the way he built it, it's just 0, 1 or 0, 1, 2, which I don't like personally. I would like to be able to do something more than that. And I will have to say, I don't know, recently I tried using it just to see how the results compare between, this versus the way I'd done it. I actually wasn't able to get it to run. That might have been my fault, but I've tried running it and it sort of spun for a little while and then choked and it was saying errors and stuff. And so That might have just, I mean, I was playing around with it like the day it was announced on Twitter. So that might have just been some initial bugs or something, but might be worth checking out. On the other hand, if you do want to just do dichotomous or trichotomous coding where you're like, maybe you're trying to identify themes that appear in a text, or maybe you're trying to classify people into different groups or something like that. As I mentioned, Atlas TI is a pretty popular software among people who do qualitative research, and it just organizes your data and codes you've come up with and definitions and things. So a lot of people use it for qualitative research, and this is a screenshot from their homepage. They announced that we've got AI now. And what is that latest AI tool? Well, it's OpenAI. So they're using GPT models to do this exact same kind of thing. Again, it's the sort of thing where they're assuming you're a qualitative researcher who wants to just sort of flag, things for this meets this definition. This is falling into that category. So it's still just dichotomous. But yeah, again, like if you're doing this kind of stuff already in Atlas TI, or if this is something you've used in the past, this is super convenient. There it is. Built right into the thing you already know. If, on the other hand, you're a little more technical and kind of a DIY type, this is a piece of code that Nirmal, I've never met him, I don't know him. He's a postdoc at a university in Texas, but he put a blog post up on RPubs about here's some code that you can make API calls straight from R to the OpenAI's API. And then actually, so that Steve Rathje paper that I told you about where they were doing the tweets and the news headlines, he actually just copied that exact code, added an extra function, a for loop, that'll go through a CSV and make the API call for each row. And so that was how they did their paper. See the prompt they were using. Is the sentiment of this text positive, neutral, or negative? Answer only with, and I think it said a number. I cut off the end to fit on the screen, but again, that's the sort of place where you might want to fiddle around with that, try and see how you can get it. One thing I think potentially could explain that thing we were talking about, where why is GPT-4 not doing as well? I think the models do better when you ask them to explain their thinking and then get a response. This is something we should talk about in best practices. So you could just say, just give me a number. I don't want you to say anything. Just say 0, 1, 2. But if you think about what the model is doing, it's trying to predict the next word. Well, if you give it a chance to say, I would give this a high score because blah, 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 7. Well, now it's trying to predict that 7 based off of the things it said about the text that you gave it. So it makes sense why it would do better. And in my own experience, it does seem like it does better if you put that at the end as opposed to say at the start, or you just don't even ask for any text. You say, just give me a number. That was a little bit of an aside, but something we should talk more about. So yeah, his code, both of these are available on the internet. If you just like R and you're a little DIY kind of person, here's some code. You don't have to DIY. You can just copy and paste, and there you go. On RPubs and then on OSF. Yeah. Right. Oh no, sorry. So this is R code. Yeah, so probably you would be running R in RStudio. You load up whatever packages it requires to do these functions, and then you copy and paste this text from Nirmal's and Steve's example code straight into an R script, and you could run it from there. The unfortunate thing I would say about this way of doing it is, if you're an R buff, then you'll probably know R is terrible at for loops. For loops in R are incredibly slow. And we got a head nod in the back. We got an R fan in the back. And this is in sequence. So this is not parallelized, and it's doing a slow for loop. So this is going to take a while. I don't know how long it took when Steve did his, however many thousand tweets, but it's not going to be one of these like 7-minute kind of things. It's going to be slower. So one thing you might want to use is the tool I've been using. This is available on GitHub if you want to use it. Again, if you're the sort of person who found yourself attracted to Atlas TI, you're probably going to find yourself a little scared of this one. It is not user-friendly. I will just warn you. But it has the advantage of being parallelized. It's going to make API calls in batches. The default is 20, but you can set it to whatever you want. Sometimes I've found because the API throttles you at a certain number of tokens per minute, so you can only transmit 100,000 tokens per minute back and forth. So if you say, I want to send out these texts in API calls, batches of 20 at a time, and they're long, you might hit that limit, and then it'll go, error, you've been throttled, sorry. So that is something to pay attention to. There is a sort of limit on the speed. But if you use this tool, you can parallelize and speed it up, but also it's got some things in it that allow for a certain amount of flexibility that I think is kind of cool, where you can have variable fields. You could do this in R too, I'm sure. We can have variable fields in the prompts themselves. So just to give you an example, remember that study I told you about with the ethical dilemma of videos? Well, there are 4 videos. And so in our analysis, we just treat that as a random factor. We're not interested in how things might differ across videos. But when the model is scoring the text from participants who watch different videos, it kind of needs to know the context of the video that the participant is responding to. So what I did was in the prompt, this is for the justification variable. I said, please rate how well they justify their ethical claim. Did they provide relevant and compelling ethical reasons to support their view? And then give me a number 0 to 10. But before that, I said, participants watched a short video about field goes here, where the question field is filled in with a short description of what the video is about. So they watched a video about the ethical permissibility of animal experimentation, when the experiments might be lethal, but they could potentially lead to medical, breakthroughs or something. So it's just a quick summary of what that video was about. And then, here's what they were prompted with, and then this participant wrote, and then that answer field gets filled in with what they actually wrote. So this tool actually was made by my dad. He's a retired software engineer, and he just does this kind of thing for fun. So I told him about what I was doing. He's like, wow, that's really cool. Let me write you something in Go. And so here it is. He's hanging out in the video call. So in case anybody has complicated questions about how it's written, he could probably answer those. But let me just kind of quickly redo my sharing. Let me show you this tool in action. Share my entire screen and not just a window. Just share the terminal. Actually, wait, I'll do it in sequence. Okay, so see that? Okay, cool. Oh, it's so tiny. Is that even close to readable for anybody? There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, this is a command line tool. If you're in Mac, you'd open Terminal. If you're in Windows, what is it called? System, whatever. You'd open the command line, and then you'd start playing around with this thing. If you're in the right working directory. So what I would do is -H is the help thing. So it tells me about what am I playing with here. We have this usage where we say, okay, we give it GPT. That's the tool we're using, and then we give it a command. Here are the available commands. The relevant ones are going to be pretty much all in this chat thing. So we'll do about chat. Well, you can do a batch, prompt, or random. Again, basically it's going to be all batch or random. Random is, I'm going to give you a CSV, pull a random row from that CSV and do the API call for that one, just so I can make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. You can also, it's called random, but you can specify which one you want. So it's just select one and run the call and show me in the terminal what I'm going to get as a response from that. Batch is, okay, do the whole thing, do the whole CSV. So suppose I say I want random. Now tell me what I need to do to get a random. These are the things you need to fill in. So we're going to go GPT chat random, and then I I need to give it a prompt file. That's the text file that says, here's the prompts that you should give to the API. The system file, which is that system prompt. And then an answer file, which is a CSV that has at least one column with the text that you want to score. If you want to use the question field, that thing I was showing you where I can flexibly put certain things in, depending on like what happened with the participant, which video they watched or whatever, then you'll need the question file, and you can have all of these flags too. So let me just show you. I'm going to do random, and then I have under my examples for a prompt file, I think it's just called, oh no, let's do Spear, what is it called? Sorry, I wish I could share my entire screen, but it looks like I have to do Windows. So it's called spearscale.txt. Then for a system file, I'm just going to use system.txt, which is system.txt is a text file that just says, you are a research psychologist examining text written by participants in a study.
These local files?
Yeah. And they're under the folder examples. So everything I have to keep.
But you could use a long file name.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me share text spearscale.txt. Super tiny again. This is the text file for the prompt. Your job is to rate the participant's spirituality based on what they wrote in response to the following prompt question field. That's going to, there are two different prompts, deja vu and dream, so it's going to get it one. The participant wrote answer, and then here are these statements. Sometimes they may not write anything that directly or explicitly shows whether the statements are true, just use your best judgment. Sort of thing I would say actually for an undergrad, all right? And then, explain, and then give me a single composite score by averaging your responses to the four statements. Give me score, X, and then I'll be able to extract that automatically. I tried just because I was curious. And as you saw, I gave you the internal consistency of the scale as GPT used it. What I'm going to get when I run batch and I run through the whole CSV is two new columns on my CSV. Whatever I fed in, I'm going to get that same thing back plus two new columns. One will be called completion, which is what did GPT say in response? Actually, like what was the exact response? And then there'll be another column called score. You can actually change that in this tool. You can set it to be called whatever you want. But the default is it'll be called score, and it will extract a number from that text response. And again, in this tool, you can say, do I want that to be the first number, the last number, all the numbers, whatever. But I just looked because I was curious. I thought, I'm asking it to take the average. Is it going to do that right? And it did. Yeah, every single time it got the average exactly right. So that was kind of fun. And if you don't care about like, is this 4-item scale that I just stole, I just copied items from the spiritual transcendence scale. You don't really care about the internal consistency there. You don't have to look at that, but you could. So that's the text of the prompt. Let's go back to the terminal. So I'm going for a random one using that prompt. System text is that one that just says you're a psychologist. And then the answer file is, I think I called it sample100.csv. Is that right? This. Yeah, it's called sample100.csv, and it's just, here's a PID, here's the dream text, here's the deja vu text. So I just pulled 100 of these just to be able to show you right now. All the things that people wrote. So now if I go back to terminal, say, okay, that's where the answers are going to come from. The answer field column, here's where it tells me about that, is just called dream. Actually, wait, I just realized I've got my CSV misformatted for the field thing. It's going to be expecting a column that says, was this dream or deja vu? And then just all of them. So let me change my prompt text file. So instead of saying, your job is to rate the participant's spirituality based on the following prompt and then a field, I'm actually just going to fill it in. I had wanted to be able to show you it using this system or the variable field, but this is the problem of doing a live demo. But if I were going to have the question field in place, then what I would actually need is a spreadsheet like this that will have a question ID, dream deja vu, and then a prompt, which is just the text of the prompt that they read. So I'm going to use the dream one and go back to my prompt file and say, instead of this variable field, we're just going to do this. Field is called dream.
That column's already labeled.
Yeah. So in the CSV that I have now, which I only just realized is misformatted for this, it's dream and deja vu as separate columns. But the way I originally did it was the column was answer or text or something, and then it was in long format. So you can also see here in the flags there are various things that we can do. So we had to answer, or we had to specify which column name we're looking for with the answer to the prompt. We'd have to fill these in if we wanted to use the variable field. You can say, where are you drawing that number from? When you're extracting a number and creating score as a column, is that the first, last, all, or none of the numbers? And then you can also do things like, which model do you want? Default is GPT-4. What temperature do you want? Default is 0.2. I'm actually going to say, I want the model to be GPT-4 Turbo. I'm not sure if it's Turbo dash preview. Yeah. But then if I say go, it'll run the API call. It's just doing one random one right now. Find out if the Wi-Fi is going to fail us. This is a lot slower than I'm used to. Okay, here we go. Gave us a score of 2.75. That's the average of these 4 items. It didn't even told me how it did that. Here it'll show you, okay, here's where we ran the command. You'll say, okay, you got a response from GPT-4 Turbo Preview with a temperature setting of 0.2. Here is your system prompt. Here is your prompt. That's user, right? And then here is assistant. That's the GPT's response. Based off of this participant's response, it seems they lean towards a more rational or skeptical view of the event described, suggesting a lower inclination towards spirituality, blah, blah, blah. Then they talk about each of the items. Maybe this is why it took a while, because it's explaining each item. And then it says...
This is a verbose output, or are you getting...
I think... I'm trying to remember what verbose is. I think that's just giving you more information about the API call itself. What was the API call, like ID number and that kind of thing. This is the complete text of what it said in response to the prompt. So then we get to the bottom. It says to compute the composite score, we add, it's been a little overly verbose, yeah. But yeah, we get an average of 2.75. So actually, let's go back and see which random one it pulled, see if we agree. Participant wrote the following. I would like to think it to be an unusually unlikely coincidence. I don't think there is a spiritual or deeper meaning behind it. And I know that thinking about it might cause me to feel guilty about the situation. That seems pretty low. It's pretty explicitly low, actually. Say about these. Number of slightly disagrees or agrees. So they say something explicit about not believing there's a higher plane of consciousness or spirituality. Anyway, this is the sort of thing that I would normally want to start doing in the playground. I'd start by looking at what is it giving me and do I like it? Another reason to have it, to not just say, give me a number, don't explain. I want to know why you gave me that number. Tell me about it. So you can look at what they're saying. It, and do that kind of playground stuff first. Then I would use the random function in here just to make sure it's still doing what I think it's doing, that I've entered the right flags into this command. But then afterwards, I would say, I don't want to just get the one. So I want to do a batch. Here's the help for the batch. It's the same inputs, except at the beginning, instead of just starting with a prompt file, you got to give an output file. And that's just name the file that you want to be produced and where you want it to go. So if I go back to here, this is the thing I just ran, except instead of random, I'm going to say batch. And then I'm going to say under examples, give me sample 100 scored.csv. Then also you can set things in here. The batch size, do you want to do, in batches of 20, you could crank it all the way down to 1 if you didn't want it, especially if you're worried I've got really long prompts or I expect really long responses and so I'm worried about getting throttled. Last one is, I'm kind of not thinking it's going to be too crazy. So let's try it with the default of 20. So now it's going to run 100 and 5 batches of 20, and then it'll show us as each batch comes back. This might be a little slower than I'd like, but.
Can you get a tally of what it's costing you each
Yeah.
time?
Great question. Yes.
Right now.
Exactly, yeah.
Where's my browser? Here. So here on their website, you can go look at the usage. There's activity, like how many calls are you making over time, but then there's also cost. So you can set like, one thing if you're using this tool you might want to do, give yourself a monthly limit. I was just getting so excited and I was like, it costs $1 to do this. So I just went crazy for a little while and I hit my limit once and I was like, wait, gotta watch out. But yeah, it's not, we'll see actually, we'll be able to see in a few minutes once it finishes what it ended up being for this. And again, so cost is gonna be a function of exchanged, but also which model you're using. And I'll show you a page where they've got their pricing. And it's priced per 10,000 tokens or something like that. I think it's sort of funny. It's like, what is the cost per 10,000 tokens? And then the cost is in like hundredths of a cent or something. And I'm like, couldn't you have done 100,000 tokens? So yeah, it's moving a little bit slowly, but we've gone through about 2 batches thus far. And it tells us we're 40% of the way there. Maybe I should have done GPT 3.5 turbo, just for the sake of the dog and pony show. Oh, so this last number is remaining. Is that what you're looking at?
That remaining cost.
Yeah, remaining time.
Oh, remaining.
Oh yeah, put it on a grant. You could build into a grant budget API fees. Yeah, I've actually done that recently for a grant budget. We need, so much for API fees. If you've already got an existing grant, you want to spend money, I don't know.
For us internally would be the complication that this would pay.
Right, right. It's funny. So among the crazy things that people have said about GPT stuff, there are some people who are like, we could replace participants with GPT because you look at the correlation between the average of humans and GPT models. First time I heard that, it was a joke. It was a prolific joke. When ChatGPT was first announced on April Fool's, they sent out an email saying, you trust us to get you high quality human participants. Well, starting, May 1st, we are going to be offering for pennies on the dollar, you can get AI participants. And yeah, that was funny. But then then people said it not as a joke. Okay, so notice, okay, we hit batch 5 out of 5, but it had a couple of failed API calls, so it's just going to retry those. And then soon, yeah. Put it on a faster model. Here is the result. Zoom in a bit. So here are the columns we had originally. This chat ID is just a number that's like, here was the call kind of, it's an identifier for the transaction on the API. Completion, here's this long piece of text that it wrote for, its response, and then it's extracted the score. This one had the error, it looks like, so something weird happened here. Why did that happen?
5 or 7?
There were 4, so it was a 7-point scale with 4 items. And yeah, here they are. Just in, as long as we're looking at it here. There we move that. Let's just look at a histogram or something. Got a surge right here. But anyway, there it is. This. Okay, so that's my demo. Hopefully it wasn't too tedious to sit there and watch it go, but that's how it works. I think maybe the next thing for us to do would be to just kind of talk through like best practices and stuff. Have a conversation about what we can do with this and what we shouldn't do with it and stuff. Do you want to take a quick break or should we just keep moving on? Keep moving? Cool. Does anyone have any questions before we do that?
Maybe a bridge question. So I'm thinking about reproducibility and transparency, and you're probably going to get to that. But
Yeah.
some part of this you would capture and make available as materials in your OSF account.
Yeah, so I'm remembering to repeat the question, which was about reproducibility and what do you put on OSF or whatnot. And that is actually, it's 2 slides away. So we'll talk about that in just a sec. But yeah, basically, I think you should be putting basically everything that you've got somewhere where people can see it. Any other questions before we do more of this kind of stuff? Let's talk best practices. So obviously this is all new and it's the Wild West and we're just figuring things out as we go along. But I think I have some thoughts. About already, like what would be good. And I've told you a little bit about this already. But in terms of validity and reliability, I think a key thing is one, you just got to make sure you choose the right model. So do your stuff in the playground to figure out which model is giving you the best results. GPT-4 seems to do better just kind of in general. But then, Steve Rathje and others have found maybe 3.5 can be better for certain things, under certain circumstances, maybe. Of course, the models are always changing, so picking the right one is going to be a good thing to think about. I think it'd be valuable, just like you would with a self-report or any other kind of measure, to not just have one score, but to have multiple indicators and aggregate them somehow. So like I did with spirituality, there's the definition-based method, then there's the scale-based method. You could similarly do something where you have maybe only one prompt, you find a prompt that you really like, but you do different models like we've been talking about earlier. Maybe you have GPT 3.5 and 4, or maybe you have Gemini and GPT-4 or something like that. A lot of different ways of getting multiple observations. And actually, so for that persuasiveness thing where, write a message encouraging people to adopt environmentally friendly habits, and then we score how persuasive is your message. What I actually did was I used the fine-tuned model, but I also gave it 3 different versions of a prompt. The model has basically just been trained on how to respond with numbers corresponding to persuasiveness given a certain piece of text. So one way I did it was just, here's the text, give me the number. I called that one the minimal prompt. And then I had another one that said, here's what somebody wrote, how persuasive is this? Give me the number. Does this draw you towards acting environmentally? Give me the number. And then I said, okay, these are all pretty highly correlated. Turn those into a latent factor, give me the factor scores, that's what I want. But there are lots of ways you could do that kind of thing. And actually, so the scale-based method I used is in some ways kind of similar to this technique Mohammed Atari and his colleagues have been working on. As far as I know, it's not published yet, but they have this preprint about what they call contextualized construct representation, where the basic idea is to take advantage of all of the work that people have put into validating survey measures, but then use those for text analysis, where you basically treat the items on the questionnaire itself as pieces of text. You have those fed into the model, and you kind of get the sort of semantic object from those, and then you basically say, how similar is that to the text that I've got? I use it myself. This is one of those things, again, where kind of like Igor's tool, I just really quickly tried it. They have an R package. I installed the R package. I tried to run it, and it wasn't working. It's probably my fault, but I couldn't quite figure out how to get it to run. But I think that would be an interesting thing to compare against, particularly if you are using a scale-based measure like the observer report thing I was doing in spirituality, where I've just got some self-report items. I flipped the verbiage around to be in the third person, but how does that compare with the contextualized construct representation? Which part of what's cool about CCR is it's not tied to any particular language model or anything like that. You could use any language model to do that. So anyway, that would be something that would be really cool to look at. There's this question of zero shot, few shot, or fine tuned. So that's again, like, do I just give you the text and I say, tell me the score? Or do I say, here's the text, here's some examples. This is a 1, this is a 5, this is a 10. Now give me the answer. That would be few shot. You could alternatively, if you're trying feeding in examples and you're looking at the results in Playground and you're just like, this sucks, why isn't this doing what I want? You could fine tune it. So if you happen to have some data like I did for that pro-environmental behavior one, I actually don't really care. Is this message persuasive to GPT? I care, is it persuasive to like normal real people? So I feed in normal real people's responses, and that tunes it a little more closely to how they would react. And that might help you to get the kind of scores you want. I think that sort of thing would maybe be most valuable for cases where you want expert judgments. You don't want just the way the average person would respond. You want the way a philosopher who specializes in ethics would respond, or maybe thinking a little more like clinical kind of applications. I want to be able to try and diagnose generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive from text. So what if I get a bunch of clinicians to look at the text and what is your best guess about this person? And then you get a whole bunch of those, you use those to fine tune a model, and then you could use that on publicly available data or data from a study or something like that. I think those kinds of applications are cases where fine tuning would actually make a lot of sense. Prompt engineering more generally, don't forget to do it. Don't just think, just ask it and see how it goes. Play with it, make sure it's doing what you want. Look at what it's saying in the Playground, how it's explaining what it's saying. I would recommend trying to put the request for a score at the end. So yeah, start in the Playground, ask for an explanation and then a score. And then tailor the system prompt. So that's another way you could try and do something, not quite fine tuning, but you say, okay, act like a whatever. If there's some particular type of judgment that you want to get, then that could work pretty well. Reproducibility. So one thing people have talked about is that temperature setting thing. If you set it to 0, it's going to give you the exact same score or response every time. Maybe you don't want that. I kind of think you don't. So that'd be another way that you might try and do something where you have different temperature settings that you average across, or maybe you set the temperature kind of high, set it to like 1, and then you run it like 5 times. You take the average or something like that. But just documenting what was the temperature setting. Document everything else. So you should tell me what, if you're going to run this and then try and publish it on OSF, what I'd want to see is what was the chat prompt? Show me the text file that you used. What was the system prompt? What was the completion? So that column that was just what is the text that it's giving? The model with the date and the version number. Was it GPT-4 Turbo preview from November 6th? This is actually one of the things that people who are more steeped in the natural language processing world are actually kind of bothered by or worried about with GPTs is because they're evolving, they're constantly being updated with new training data, improved. They might be different now than they were 6 months ago. So somebody publishes a paper and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Let me try and reproduce that. You can't. Why? Because it's a new model or whatever. It's like, so there's a little bit of a worry there, I think. Again, ostensibly they're getting better, but well, maybe they're getting better overall, but for the specific thing that you want to do, now it's worse than it used to be. So they do have a backlog of, the models from certain dates that you can still call, even though they're not the latest. But I think that's something very important to at least document, if not try and account for when you're running a study and putting your materials online. So here's that. The 4 Turbo preview is sort of the latest one. It's the turbos are basically, we've optimized the model that we had before for speed. So now it's a little bit faster and they also tend to be a little bit cheaper. Do I have a slide with a link to this? I said I was going to show you about pricing. Let me take you back to the browser. It's the 22nd, so that cost us 74 cents a minute ago. Yeah, not bad. Pricing. They have the price by 1,000 tokens. So GPT-4 is the most expensive, and they actually charge differently for tokens coming in versus going out. But there it is, sort of 1 cent per 1,000 tokens or 3. Oh no, that's the turbo 1 and 3. If you go GPT-4 not turbo, it's actually 3 and 6. 3.5 turbo. This is what I was saying about couldn't you have given this to me in 10,000 or 100,000 tokens? This is 0.005 cents per 1,000 tokens. Then they have some other stuff here, and if you want to fine tune, you actually do have to pay a little bit to tune it. There's more on there, of course. So. The last thing, and again, so maybe this is pretty close to where we're going to want to sort of open for more discussion, but thinking sort of like when this would not be something you want to do. When would GPTs not be a good choice? One, I think, is like we talked about before, when you're scoring really long texts. So if you want to assess, entire scientific paper or an entire corpus of books or something, you want to do something with Google Books, potentially maybe not, unless you could sort of randomly sample from it or something like that. But just like if you have this crazy long prompt and you're paying by the token, and the longer the prompt, maybe the more likely it's going to hallucinate, then yeah, maybe that's not going to be a good choice. So there are techniques for language analysis that are designed for lots and lots of text like that, like a topic model or something, and those might be better. You can also do structural topic models where you're trying to predict things about it based off of like metadata from the text. So those sorts of things might be a little better.
So Michael, within the sort of normal range, you had 4 sentences at 150 words as a target.
Yeah.
That isn't long?
No, I think that would be fine. Yeah. Yeah. So another case would be when older language models are actually pretty good and have been developed for that specifically. So that Hugging Face library I showed you has like 800 and something different pre-trained models. So 824 models for sentiment analysis. A lot more than total, but like if you want to do sentiment analysis, people spend a lot of time working on those, figuring those out, trying to make those good. They might do just as well or maybe even better for free. BERT is open source. Then you can also look under the hood if you're somebody who does have expertise in machine learning and you think, I want to know exactly what it's doing. I'm not that person. And then, that would be kind of nice to you. So if somebody's already developed a model that does a pretty good job already of this exact thing that you happen to want to do, it might be cheaper, it might be better even. Some of the advantage of the older techniques, again, like BERT and these other older ones are open source, so you can go play around with them. They can also be run locally. They're way smaller and simpler models. That means you could probably run it on your laptop. You don't need to make API calls. Why would that matter? No API fees. There was the link to the pricing. And then also, you're not actually transmitting data to anyone. So imagine you are trying to do something like clinical diagnostics. Maybe you don't want to transmit that over the internet, even if it's encrypted, even if OpenAI says we aren't saving your data, it's just a headache at the IRB or something like that. That could be a case where it's just nice to be able to do it all on your own computer. And again, and also that other thing about model updates, like sentence BERT is sentence BERT is sentence BERT. It's not going to change unless, somebody trains a new version of it, and then you could go get that one. So like they're consistent in this way. That might be nice for reproducibility. So I think those are some initial reflections, but I really do want to get to this discussion where we just get to talk about this, like concerns you have about this kind of technique, questions you have about when it would make sense or when it would not, all this kind of stuff. So that's all I have in terms of slides. So let's just chat. Yeah, Rick.
It seems like most uses today played off of manual or human coding.
Yeah.
Are we getting to a place where you would do studies that would only use AI?
Yeah.
No backup from prior history or examples of human coding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Rick is asking about whether or not we could do a study where we actually have no human coding at all and we just go straight to AI. And I think that is kind of the promise and the excitement about doing something like this, is if you could show this really is consistent, like almost perfectly even with what humans would do, then you could say, I don't need to validate it against humans again, I can just use it. I do think in the short term, we want to continue validating it in some way or another, or at least, if you said, I want to go on the Reddit, the push shift corpus, and I want to get everything from, r/whatever, and I don't have any human coding, probably you'd want to do some kind of initial pilot work to make sure that it's giving you the kind of thing you're looking for. But eventually, I think, that's kind of what's cool and exciting about this. I mean, the extreme example of it would be the historical stuff. You definitely ain't going to get any human coding for that, unless you hired a bunch of historians or something to work for you. But yeah, I think in the near term, it's easy to get excited and you look at it, correlation 0.85, great, done. And kind of go, I don't need to worry about that anymore. But I think at least in the near term, we really do want to keep thinking about making sure we have some way of validating the scores that it's giving us. We can do more questions, but we can also let's just riff and chat. Yeah, Patty.
I'm curious about the learning aspect. So when you would have had it learn
Right.
coding system.
Yeah. Yeah. So Patty's question for the Zoom people is about actually having it so that each API call is an independent thing where it doesn't remember what it did last time, so that it can actually learn and get better as it scores more. And maybe it gets a better sense of what should be a high or low relative to others in the sample or something like that. And I think that would be really cool. And the way that I'm doing it now, the strategy is just I try in the playground, I try a prompt, I go, that doesn't make sense. Or I fiddle around with it to get something that makes me think, yeah, this is doing well. Then I try it on a few more different texts and I go, it doesn't really capture that. So let me add something about that. It would be nice if you could do something chat GPT like where you say, here's a text, tell me what you think the score is. It says 6. You go, that seems awfully high, and here's why I think that's awfully high. And he goes, oh, okay, I get that. I'd say maybe a 4 now. Let's do another one. And then, so you could do something where it learns like that, and then you could send it off to do a bunch. I think, I've never used Atlas TI, and I'm not 100% sure that they have this, but some of the stuff I was seeing on their website made it look like you can kind of do something like that, where there is this more interactive thing. I don't know if it's quite what we're imagining, but there might be some of that stuff built into Atlas TI that would be worth looking into. And it'd be cool to try and figure out a way to do that with the API itself. I'm not quite sure how to do that, though. Suppose you could have it go through a bunch of them. You could look at outliers or something, then feed those in as like for a few shot learning. I don't know. I'm struggling to think of how you would do something like that, but it does seem like something that'd be worth at least exploring.
Like to think like something.
Oh,
Is that
yeah.
affecting the background information that's going on or the goal that it has?
Yeah. That might be one of these machine learning. Oh, sorry. So what was your name? Ayana was asking about whether, like, what is going on when I say think like a philosopher or whatever, when I give it a system prompt, like, what is it actually doing? Short answer is, I'm not really sure. You may have picked up, I'm really into this thing and I've started playing around with GPT models and stuff. I have no background in machine learning. I don't know what I'm talking about, barely, so like, I don't know, but it's something that goes into the background of before you get the chat prompt. There's the system prompt, but then there's the chat prompt. The chat prompt is informed by what's in the system prompt. And the default, like if you were in ChatGPT, the actual just chat interface, the system prompt is like, you are a helpful assistant. Told it things like, you are a highly thoughtful, reflective person, or stuff like that. And that actually changes what it says. To the same chat prompt with the same temperature setting, same model, et cetera. What exactly in the model that's doing, I don't know. Hey, Dad, do you know?
The system prompt sets the identity of the quote unquote assistant or person that's responding. And so if you can say more about it, it's creating context to generate a probable next word. I've tried things like, you are a sassy Irish bartender, and I get a certain kind of a response. Or you work on the
You have to read it with the right accent.
Yes. You are a member of our customer care team, and you are responding to the this customer, and I asked the head of the team, tell me about your ideal candidate that you would hire. When you hire someone, what attributes are you looking for? And so he gave me a description of all of the different attributes of his ideal team member. I put them in there, and I found that when I put in those adjectives, I got much, much better results because it creates sort of a probabilistic context for giving you what you're looking for. That system prompt is really important.
Yeah, but like technically under the hood, it sounds like Dad and I don't know. Yeah.
And so if the, so the content of the text is really important. You know, is this being tentative or is this person being very straightforward? So I imagine that if you have a huge data set and you just want to make it shorter, and so you cut out a little bit of the text, that will probably influence.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing that's kind of cool about the GPT models in general is that they do have that sense of composition. And this was something we were chatting about a little earlier, that the huge weakness of a dictionary-based method is it's just pulling words. Some people call it a bag of words approach because you're just like, does this word indicate the thing? Does that word indicate the thing? So if I said this was definitely not the greatest experience I've ever had, it would say greatest experience, very positive. Whereas GPT knows how words come together to form meanings in sentences and sentences into texts. And so I wouldn't actually worry quite so much about text sort of pruning and cleaning for this as I would for other things. So like if you were to do like topic models and other things that people talk about, they'll say you should filter out the stop words. So the for, the a, and that kind of thing. Just strip those out. Those are just noise. But in this case, I don't think you actually need to do that. And maybe you wouldn't want to because then you're compromising the original meaning. You know? It's all right. So we moved the mic. Did the Zoom people hear that question? Should I keep repeating the question or?
Repeating the question is helpful.
Yeah, Patty.
I'm curious about giving. So in the training
Oh,
data, I
uh-huh.
would imagine that as ChatGPT, how do you define spirituality?
Yeah.
So much debate about
Yeah.
what the definition of spirituality even is. I'm wondering, did you try to not give a definition? And
I did not try that. And that could be very interesting. It's giving me an idea for a study where you say, we're going to take psychologists' definitions of a bunch of constructs that are well known. So they're not like some niche thing like openness to experience, where like nobody's heard of that unless you're taking personality psychology, but you're like extroversion or something like that. And you just want to know, let me just ask it, is this person extroverted? How extroverted? Is this person extroverted? Here's the definition. And then you copy it out of, McRae and Costa or something like that. You just like take the textbook definition and its intuitive sense, and then you try and predict self-reports. You try to predict something that is a behavioral marker of the construct or whatever, which has better predictive validity. That would be really cool. Because if it turns out that GPT's intuitive sense is better than the definition, then maybe we should just use that. And it also, I mean, it on the one hand, you might think there's no way that could be. But on the other hand, Cray and Costa's definition is their attempt to put into other words this idea that's kind of fuzzy and like they have a sense of it. That same fuzzy sense of what is extroversion? Well, GPT kind of has that too. So could it just do it the way that you and I might, where we would struggle to articulate, like we know the meaning of extroverted, but we would struggle to explain that meaning in other words. Yeah, that would be a cool study.
There's a question from the Zoom chat. Question, what are the steps before the command prompt coding session you showed us? And did you operate on a terminal of a program platform, for example, Visual Studio Code, or on the computer's command prompts directly?
Yeah, so two questions. What is the prep to running the command line tool that I was using? And where was that command line tool? Was it in my computer or was it in another piece of software? It was just the Mac terminal. That was where it was. And of course, you could do it on Windows or Linux. And then, actually, it can go on Windows and Linux? Yes. Helpful assistant. And the prep for it is you need to have a CSV that has a column with the text. You need to have text files that have the text of the system and chat prompts, including maybe the variable fields, the answer and question fields. You definitely need the answer field because that's what's going to change every time it does the API call. It's pulling it from that CSV. So once you've got that, you're ready to go. Again, play around in the playground, make sure you're getting results you like, all of that kind of stuff. That's prep too. But if you want to just, what do I need literally to have on my hard drive in order to run this thing? That's what you need.
I'm just thinking one of your reference to the IRB is something we have to deal with quite a lot.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking the fact that the CSV needs to sit on your laptop is itself potentially
Oh,
a tricky thing, right? I mean, we have encrypted laptops by Duke standards.
Yeah.
But still, you're carrying around sensitive information on a computer that could be stolen by someone.
true. Yeah, I mean, one thing, of course, you probably would want to do is just de-identify it or use your dummy identifiers. So, sorry. Rick was asking about, having potentially sensitive data on your own hard drive, which if you're subject to an IRB means probably needs to be encrypted. Probably there's all kinds of rules about what you're allowed to do with it. Yeah, so I would say one thing you could tell an IRB is separate the identifiers from the actual data itself. We're going to have the linkage file or whatever, do the whole thing you'd normally do and just say that. And when we make these API calls, those data are not held onto by OpenAI. I'm pretty sure the API calls themselves are encrypted, blah, blah, blah. So like there are things to say there, although it would not surprise me in the slightest if you had a number of IRB officials confused and worried when you first proposed this to them. Yeah, I have done IRB approval for this before. So it's not like they're going to be too rancorous about it, I don't think. But yeah, your mileage may vary depending on your institution.
Could you? You would do it like to connect to GitHub, for example, like.
Ooh. Is even more like you're putting your data,
Yeah, kind of like you would do with like R, for
Right.
example. Like
Yeah.
You're just loading the working directory, that can be.
Yeah, that is a good question. Could your command line file path be to something hosted online? Is that something that the app can do at the moment?
If it's a networked drive or something like that, if you can, if you've got a file somewhere and your computer can access it from the operating system or just as, okay, it's available to me. You've got the right protocol for getting the file. Think like it's in an S3 bucket or something like that. You've got a way of getting the file, then it should be transparent and just work as is. But this conversation is giving me the idea that if you are the kind of a researcher who can work in a programming language like R, then it would make sense that we would give you tools that you could work within the constraints you're accustomed to using. I've got this encryption, decryption technique I'm using, or whatever that might be. And then you can go more directly into accessing the data wherever it might be.
That'd be good. Oh, just ideas of things you want to do with this. That would be fun. De-identified, encrypted, not stored on the OpenAI servers.
Well, yeah, I was thinking then I will need to download
Yeah.
this file and then I would save it back to Box.
At least the way it is at UNC and Baylor, where I have affiliations, it's like, you basically, when you do your IRB approval, say what your like data security level is going to be, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, et cetera. And then that just determines what kinds of security you need for like everything. And so I think probably if you're tier 1 or 2 in terms of UNC terminology, then this would be totally fine. Tier 1 is like, you don't even have names or anything that could ever link this back to the person. So you're basically free to do stuff. Tier 2 is like, you need to have certain kind of password protection and stuff. But then that's just like whatever you normally have to do anyways for this IRB approved study, you just have to do for this too. So my guess is probably it's not a big hurdle there. But maybe worth looking into. Call up your local IRB and say, what do you think about this? Yeah.
That you're gonna do this, or do you just put it in your data security?
I have thus far not put it into a consent document, but it would stand to reason that that might be a good thing to do. And so I've just, question was, do you put in the consent document, hey, your data might be coded by GPT? Thus far, I haven't done that, but I have told IRBs I'm doing this, and thus far they haven't complained. Because I do this thing where I link them to like, here's the page where it says we're not storing your data. It says your data is your data. It's all totally de-identified. It's not super sensitive. They're not talking about, suicidal ideation or something really kind of sensitive. They're talking about imagine you had a dream. So yeah, so far I haven't had a problem with it. But yeah, it probably would be good, even just it's not like we'd be wronging you if we didn't tell you this, but it might be good to just tell you, yeah, we're going to use GPT models to code this, and that means it's going to be sent through an API, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Example of project folks in my group, particularly Fernando, are working on is kind of interesting. Have been curious about undergraduates' understanding of the notion of stress, in particular as it relates to the notion of anxiety.
Yeah.
They might use the words interchangeably. When they say they're stressed, do they mean they're anxious? And they say they're anxious, so they really just mean they're under stress.
Yeah.
And you can imagine it even affects how they respond to questions about those two things. Which one are they thinking about? So we've got narrative data. We have essays of maybe 100 words, 150, very beautifully detailed and rich. And part of what we want to code for is the presence of stress-related themes. And they wrote we randomized the order, and they wrote one on anxiety and one on stress. And the question is, how much do you see one bleeding into the other?
Yeah. That actually, interestingly, would be a case maybe where a dictionary-based method isn't quite so hopeless, or might actually work really well, because you could say, just given the theoretical definition of stress and anxiety, we should see these words for stress, but not for anxiety. We should see those words for anxiety, but not for stress. Just count them. But I think, GPT approaches would also work really well here too, where you could say, here's the definition of stress per, this theory. Is this really what the person is describing? Or are they describing anxiety? And then get a kind of score for how closely their account matches. And also maybe like, if you fed both in at the same time, to what extent are they really is the participant's description of stress and anxiety showing discriminant validity?
Yes. Yeah.
Or are they just the same?
Human coders do, right?
Right.
The first part you said, and we have had human coders do that.
Yeah.
It's very hard for them to compare 200-word essays
Right.
and come up with some story.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a very cool thing to explore. Yeah.
Earlier, you said that you might be able to, after giving the AI the answer from the participant, how much the AI itself felt persuaded? Like, was it persuaded to be more environmentally friendly? Does that mean the AI has a certain degree of like its own opinion and bias, or is that just based on what it knows?
Yeah, so the question is the model itself capable of bias and having its own kind of views about things capable of being persuaded or not? I would say, these are the really interesting questions of like the philosophy of AI that we all are probably going to have to start thinking a lot more about. My view is, given what GPT models currently are doing, it doesn't have its own views about things that we're actually persuading one way or the other. It's just really good at predicting what other humans would say who do have views. But it's certainly capable of bias. And in fact, this is the kind of thing that we were talking a little bit about before where, and in fact, actually, it was a controversy when ChatGPT first came out. Like, conservatives were saying it's got a liberal bias. And then some people made right-wing GPT, which was trained on, Trump speeches or something, Fox News, that kind of thing. And they wanted to have their own version. So it's certainly capable of bias. I think it probably does show a bias. There's some studies where people look at how does GPT reason about different things? Does it have a tendency to attribute certain things to men versus women or whatever? It does. And so that is something to be thinking about in terms of, is it giving us the data we want? Is it showing biases that we don't like or that are skewing our results or something? Potentially, again, the sort of thing that we could do where we say, the key research question just is the validity or reliability of GPT scores higher or lower for men versus women across racial or socioeconomic classifications or something like that? I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at. Yes, as there is probably a slight bias, but maybe not a huge one, and maybe there are ways of fixing that, or of kind of bias correcting it. Yeah.
I guess if you're asking the AI if it feels persuaded or not, it can explain how it feels, but the kind of explanation it's giving is based on like human examples it knows of.
Mm-hmm. It's doing a super fancy autocomplete, trying to tell you what would a person say in this context, given everything that's been said thus far. Yeah. It's like the lights are on and nobody's home. The lights are on to make you think there's a human there.
Developmentalists who code videos a lot.
Oh,
Seeing that front page of the OpenAI where you could go from text to video.
Yeah.
Can it go from video, go the other direction?
Yeah, I don't know.
You feed a video and it somehow generates text.
Something about we moved from still images and text to video is like terrifying to me. But yeah, I don't know. And I don't know how available Sora is yet in terms of, are they just announcing that's the new tool is the video production. You type something in, it generates a video. I don't know exactly what functionality is available yet. How available it is just sort of a beta test that they're letting you play with a little bit. But yeah, certainly seems like, I was saying during the break, like within a month, part 2 of this talk today is going to be surely obsolete. Like it's just, everything is moving so fast that like, yeah, within a year, a couple of years, who knows? Maybe you could say, here's a video of a mother and a child interacting. To what extent is the mother showing, the following behaviors or whatever?
There are some action to describe sort of reverse correlation type of study on it where they have an AI that has stable diffusion, produce an image, and then see like if there's anything.
Oh, It's sort of like back translating where,
That translates.
yeah, like where you've got like for the Zoom people, if you wanted to develop a scale in a new language, you would take maybe a questionnaire, self-report or something like that from one language, you translate it into the other language. Then you'd have somebody who's fluent in both languages who hadn't seen the original, translate it back into the original language. And then you say, how similar is it? You could do something kind of similar where you have an AI describe what's happening in a video and then have another AI create a video from that description, and then you see how similar the videos are. Just imagining all the videos of like, make a video where Trump slaps Xi Jinping, or like just the things that would suddenly start coming out, and like the chaos of, yeah. I feel much less ennui about AI when I use it to do fun stuff than when I think about what could be done with it and how horrible it could be. Yeah.
The less worrisome version of that is if you wanted to produce stimulus materials for a study, access to go out and hire actors and videotape, could you
Yeah.
possibly generate plausible videos or still images?
Yeah, yeah, you could describe a very specific scenario and a slight difference between it, have it create videos where, you know, we've just changed, you know, this word or, you know, whatever, like, super cool. And yeah, a lot of people have started using existing GPT, you know, even just through ChatGPT, making experimental stimuli that are text-based. So like you want to generate items maybe for a new self-report, describe the thing you're looking for and say, come up with, you know, 100 statements that could plausibly describe a person who's high in this or low in that. You could say, I want to create a set of 20 different sets of vignettes for a vignette experiment where we systematically vary this aspect of the scenario, but we keep all of the other stuff, these things fixed, but we then would sort of randomly vary all these other things. So if you do this kind of stuff like in moral psychology, I've done studies where, you know, you look at like, if somebody is morally bad, people think they're less happy, regardless of how you describe their psychological states. Just the badness makes people go, I'm not sure they're really happy. Usually the way you want to do that is you don't just have one set of vignettes where it's here's Joe and here's what his life is like and he feels really great, but he's a bad person. You have like 5 different versions. And then you treat that as a random factor because, you know, there can be Joe and there can be Anya and there can be, you know, whoever. You have a whole bunch of different characters where the stuff that shouldn't matter varies in random ways. 5? That's all you got? How about 1,000? Right? Like GPT, give me 1,000 versions of this sort of vignette. Some people have started doing that kind of thing, which I think is really cool. Increases the kind of naturalistic qualities, you know, a little bit of external validity, generalizability kind of stuff is very cool. We have 5 minutes left. I wasn't sure we were going to go all the way to 12. Does anybody have any more questions? Any more things we want to talk about? We also break. Oh, yeah.
I could find this out by myself, but you probably know. Does GPT recognize AI generated text?
Ooh.
As like that's not a person wrote that.
I think I know where you're going with that. So the question was, can GPT recognize text that is GPT produced or otherwise AI produced? And I think that's a great thing to look at. I haven't tried it. I'm assuming you're interested because you want to be able to detect either low quality responses from online participants or bots. We had a problem recently for a study I'm involved with at Baylor where they wanted to get participants from a bunch of different universities. And so I said, well, hey, I know I'm also at UNC, so I could just post it on our like UNC psychology department Facebook page and get a sample from there. Turns out it's a publicly visible Facebook page. And they got within about a day, like 2,000 responses, most bots. And now we have this huge pile of mostly garbage and we're trying to figure out what's the good stuff. And it'd be really cool if we could say, hey, GPT, would you have written this? Actually, not just for research, but if you're teaching right now and you don't think your students are using ChatGPT, you better think again. My partner's here at Duke, and she is teaching an intro to environmental science class, forest systems. Anyway, the class itself is immaterial, but the homework involves, you know, here, explain like, why is it that in a forest, it usually starts mostly pine trees and then eventually evolves to be mostly deciduous trees? Explain. If you just ask GPT that, it gives you a pretty decent answer. It gives you an answer that has a very characteristic format that's like, the answer includes several factors, colon. Factor 1, colon. And then and so you can recognize if they just copy and paste, it's pretty easy. She found a bunch of people doing that, and it's obvious when they just copy and paste, but it's pretty easy to say the first thing and then say, can you put that in, 200 words? Can you simplify the language a little bit? And I don't know if you'd be able to tell the difference between what it gives you after that third one. But maybe GPT could. That would be really cool. Cheating detection system using fire to fight fire. Yeah.
Kind of related to that, but then, so if GPT does not save the data,
Mhm.
not the end user, somebody has input and those answers are stored somewhere, they should be able to see and read.
Yeah. So the comment was about if people are using ChatGPT instead of the AI or the API, then you could probably detect cheaters by just getting access somehow to that server that tells you who made what calls and what the text was generated. So you could maybe do something like search for this piece of text exactly in the log and then find them that way. That would be very cool. I think, yeah, you'd need to have some sort of deal with OpenAI to do that. And yeah, you could even do something like, I don't really care if they're in Minnesota making ChatGPT calls. I just care about people who are within 10 miles of Duke. And I want search through the last week's worth of things. Yeah, that would be very cool. I don't think you can currently do that. Maybe you can. I haven't looked into it, but I doubt it. But very cool. I bet Duke administrators should be thinking about that sort of thing right now. Yeah. Oh. Well, obviously, so yeah, we have 30 seconds left until the official time limit. But I'm down to chat. We're going to have lunch, I think. Let's hang out and talk more. Thank you so much.